This is a new Storyville museum, newish. It's been open, I think, less than a year. And it's located at the edge of what the area where Storyville actually was. Storyville was like a 14 block district, mostly on the other side of Basin Street. That was our red light district here. And there were a couple different red light districts before this one actually properly opened. There was a place called the Swamp. It was kind of a little couple block area in what's now the CBD that was more pretty primitive. It was like one-story buildings, not a lot of decorations. They would have like a couple boards for the bars, barge boards, and they would have like red curtains. But it more was focused on sailors as clients and people that were coming down the river, like riverboat, workers who would come down, break apart their barges, and then they would like have a night at the Swamp, it was called. Then there was Gallatin Street, which was over near where the French Market is today. And actually in the 1930s, they knocked down those row houses, but they still had those houses on the edge that were the brothels. And they would have like gambling halls, saloons, and then you could rent rooms at the top. Storyville is spoken about a little bit in a little bit higher regard because it was more higher end bordellos, and there were a lot of politicians and lawmaker investors, and it wasn't illegal. The terminology is kind of iffy, but it was accepted by the city. There wasn't any kind of, they had tried to pass laws and kind of fight prostitution in the city, and they just never really could get ahead of it. People were worried about moving into one apartment and then having the other side of apartment, be where sex work was happening. And so Sidney Story, he was like a alderman in the city. He came up with this scheme. He did like a tour of Europe, came back, and he said he had this plan, and he said, let's word it where we're not going to legalize prostitution, but we're going to make it illegal in everywhere else besides this 14 block district. So once you step over this line, it's illegal here. It's not going to be illegal on this side. That's how they worded it, because they couldn't really make prostitution legal. So they worded it like that. As soon as they did, they had investors, they had judges, police officers who were investing into these bigger brothels. One of the first big brothels built was a really nice place on Basin Street, opened by Kate Townsend, and it cost, in today's money, they estimate it cost around $4 million. It had marble, black walnut, like really good quality materials, and it was, the people working out there would have silk gowns. A lot of these places were appointment only. So Storyville was kind of set up to be more higher clients. It wasn't always, there was a lot of darker aspects to it. This museum will get into stuff like that. They kind of show, it's not just like glitz and glam, but they do show a lot of the darker aspects to the red light district, the issues with STDs, the issues with violence. There was a lot of drug abuse. Contraceptives were like hard to come by because of the Comstock Act. So that was a whole other issue. You would have families that you would have women that would have children in the red light district, and their children would grow up in this environment, and they were exposed to explicit sexual activity really, really young. There were times where certain brothels would auction off one of these kids for like a deflowering ceremony, really awful, vile stuff. Pretty Baby is a great example of this. There was a girl who was auctioned off at 12 years old in one of these bordellos for things like that. So there's a lot of stuff like that. Gambling was a huge part of it. They have a whole wing that talks about gambling, jazz music. So you could spend like a morning or an afternoon in here, and it does, it's nice to learn about the vices, and it does talk about a lot of like the seedy underbelly of what made New Orleans this type of a city. This is a port city and a lot of people in and out. So this was a big part of the culture.